I think there's still a leftover of the great myth that leaders are born and not made. Your leaders are not always the best examples to follow. A lot of my leadership, I was mimicking others. I wasn't leading authentically. It is a skill set that is uniquely yours. When you lean into your authentic leadership style, then that's where trust can be built. I can't think of another field that has more impact than leadership. We had 8,000 employees. That was 8,000 people and their families that were impacted by the quality of the leadership. I joke I was burned out before it was cool. It's that 24/7, 365, and no amount of money fixes it. Don't buy into the hustle culture. Work is not why we're here. Growing up in the 80s, your goal was to get to the top of the org chart. And I got up there and I looked around and I said, is this it? Like, where's the zen? Where's the happiness? So when my phone went in low power mode, if I just set it off to the side for 30 minutes and picked it up, is it all better? No, it has to be charged. That's the same with us. A good night's sleep doesn't fix burnout.
Okay, well, let's get started then. Steve, welcome to the show. Starting with leadership as a topic, can you expand on your first leadership role and what you learnt there?
Yeah, it was a wonderfully learning experience for me. Horrific for the people that were on the receiving end of it. So from the time I was 17 till the time I was about 2021, I was the weekend man. I'm gonna date myself here. I was the weekend manager at a video store. So I used to joke that in Rice Lake, Wisconsin, I lorded over the place you wanted to be on Friday and Saturday nights because, this was January 1988, Dirty Dancing came out, all these classics. And, back then it was whoever could get to the video store first got the best movies. And so having no leadership experience, 17 years old, I was put in this position and I was literally one day I was just an individual contributor and the owner Fred came to me and said, hey, I'm going to make you weekend manager. I'm going to give you a 25 cents an hour raise, which was riches to me. And you're going to run the operations from 5 o'clock on Friday till 9 o'clock on Sunday night. Gave me the keys, wished me luck. And now I was managing a group of my peers, other high school and college students. And my view of leadership came from Fred, the owner. Fred was a yeller. Fred, I don't think he ever spoke in a normal tone on anything. He was 60 years old. He had been in business all his life. Him and his wife started this video store and for some reason turned the keys over to 17-year-old Steve. And so I was mimicking him. And if I wanted something done, I would be very pointed about it and I would yell. And what was funny about it was, one particular weekend we were slammed and we had this one employee that every time it would get really busy, she'd go blow up balloons for the kids or something. And I remember opening the door to where this back room was that she was and yelling down the hallway that she needed to come out and help. And the next Monday I go in, pick up my paycheck or whatever. And Fred's like, hey, I need to talk to you. And he's like, listen, enough's enough. I heard from a customer you were yelling at an employee. And I was like, yeah, it was Tracy, right? Can you believe this, Tracy? And he's like, well, don't yell at employees. And he's yelling at me as he's telling me not to yell at employees.
Do as I say and not as I do.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, listen, this keeps us up. Maybe you won't work here anymore. And that was my first leadership lesson, was two things, really. One, don't yell at people. It's a pretty good one, right? I rank that up there towards the top. But the second one was, your leaders are not always the best examples to follow. Now, it was another 10 years before I had a chance to actually lead a team again. And now this was a big, huge global manufacturer. And I had softened a lot. I had worked for some really good leaders. But my second leadership really experience it was good. I think people that worked for me in that time period would say that I was generally a positive and democratic, probably had very much of a coaching style. But my second example was still not my own. I was using a quilt work of examples, books I have read, training classes that I went to. And it took me till I was in my late 30s to realize that a lot of my leadership, I was mimicking others. I wasn't leading authentically. And so that those were my first real leadership experiences. And I there's times I want to write apology notes to some of the people that I led. Like, listen, I wasn't consistent, right? I would one day I would like, oh, I got to do this as a leader, and I would go do that, and maybe it would stick for a week, and then I'd, like, oh, now I got to go do this, and I would do something different. It was probably whiplash for a lot of folks, but that really informed a lot of what I do now in coaching, which is, executives that I work with, their leadership still has this mimicking component to them versus what is your way? What is your natural state of leadership? And how do we bring that forward? And how do we make sure you understand it and can articulate it?
So there's a few things I want to dig into there. So, firstly, your example of becoming a leader at 17 at the video store. I had a very similar thing. I was 17 and was made a leader at a cinema. So same kind of like retail. And again, no training, just here you go, one day to the next, you're wearing that uniform, not that uniform, off you go. And exactly that, we just mimic what we see. Why do you think it is? And I know you've worked with leaders for decades now. Why do you think it is that so many leaders are put into leadership positions and are not trained or not supported in that transition?
I think there's still a leftover of the great myth that leaders are born and not made, that you're just supposed to instinctively know how to stand in front of a group of people and say, follow me, let's go off. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's a skill set. It's a skill set that you have to learn. But again, it is a skill set that is uniquely yours. You have to make it your own because that's where trust comes from. If I am not authentic in my leadership, people can smell that a mile away. The inconsistency, even just the feeling that you are not being truthful to who you are. On the other hand, when you lean into your authentic leadership style, when you understand it, when you lean into it, then that's where trust can be built. So it starts with that, back in the 80s, it was, leaders were born, not made. The second piece is, and it still exists today, only about 66% of leaders, and in some research, it's up to 80% of leaders have never been trained in leadership before they were thrown into a leadership position. So, I'm 30 years, 35 years into working, and it hasn't changed. I didn't take my first, I think I was 33 when I went to my first leadership class, which that's a whole different thing on if sitting in a classroom is the best way to learn leadership skills. But there's still this underinvestment, underdevelopment of leaders, coupled with a very high expectation that you should figure it out quickly and perform at the highest levels.
It's something that I find. So my background is in sales training, and
Mm-hmm.
I see a parallel there as well.
Right, right.
A lot of time, companies just expect salespeople to be
Yeah.
born salespeople. You either do it or you don't, and you either hit your targets or you're fired, and that's it. And what always strikes me as odd is that sales leadership are six-figure salaries plus. In what other six-figure plus profession would you expect to just start doing it and know what to do and figure it out?
Right,
You would have extensive training
right,
if you're a
right,
lawyer or architect or
right.
whatever else.
A physician.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And although you could argue the stakes are higher if
Right,
you're a doctor with
right,
no training versus
right.
with, in a business, leaders make or break the success of a business. And so do, let's say, revenue generation is so important.
Mhm.
If those things aren't done well, the risk is not just that you don't thrive, but you don't survive as a business.
Right.
And so I've always found it weird that there's no acknowledgement of that to invest in what you need to be able to thrive from those areas,
Right.
at least at those two. What are your thoughts there in terms of the
Yeah.
disconnect?
Right. Well, you go to the classic reason why. Part of it is, well, if I train them to be great leaders, they're going to leave me. Someone's going to come get them, which, I used to run like tuition reimbursement programs, right? People would go and they get their bachelor degrees, their master degrees. And again, this was when I worked in big global manufacturing. And I remember sometimes people would leave mid program. And normally it always happened. A VP would say, "Can we get some of that money back that we spent on them to go get it?" And I'm like, they were using that knowledge the day they learned it. It wasn't like Wizard of Oz where they were at the end they were given the certificate and all of a sudden now they realized everything. They were learning and they were using that information. But I'm always surprised by that mentality that if we invest, that first of all, they're not every time we invest, they're not getting a little bit greater in what they're doing. And or that if we invest too much, then they're going to leave us. And to your point, I can't think of another field that has more impact than the leadership of an organization. And you're absolutely right. The stakes in medicine and some are quite high. But, if you're in an organization, I was in a business unit that did over $1 billion a year in revenue. We had 8,000 employees. That was 8,000 people and their families that were impacted by the quality of the leadership that we had. That was their paycheck. That was being able to show up to the office the next day, that it was still there. It seeps into so much. But again, to your point, it is so undervalued and underinvested in at times. Now, with that said, I'm also not a firm believer of, well, then put them in a training course or then give it, that if it's not custom and it's not immediately applicable and working with again, that authentic style, then it's almost as bad as not investing at all.
Mm-hmm. So in general, and I know where I stand on this, are you more of an advocate of coaching than you are of training?
Absolutely. Now, does everyone get a coach? Absolutely not. Right? It's normally reserved for special circumstances. Sometimes for all the right reasons, sometimes for all the wrong reasons. But where a coach gets brought in. That's why I've been over the last couple of years, advocating and building well, is there a process? Is there a way for people to extract leadership lessons like I used to, but not to mimic, but to get the insight from, to then put into their own toolkit to use their own way, gather it, but then use it in a way that it fits in with what they're doing. Right. And I think if there's a piece that, if I look at, I'm a little getting into the later chapters of my career now, is thinking if I could leave something behind, it is a process for people to capture the learning, but then make it something that they can use in their own terms, on their own accord.
So I want to dig into that with you, because I think there's always a balance to be had between the authenticity versus what others need. Where would you say that balance is for leaders? Where I agree they need to be authentic, but there's also what their team or what individuals might need from them. How do you balance that?
It's a very good point. It can't just be, well, it feels good, so then everyone's going to have to live with it. It has to start with humility. It has to start with understanding that leadership is an influence process. Here in the US, I joke about the US was founded on a bunch of people going, yeah, I don't want to do that. we're going to get on a boat and go somewhere where we can do what we want to do. And it's in the very DNA of it is. So, especially in the US, because again, I worked in international and we would bring leaders from all over the world into the US and we'd bring US leaders out into the world as well. But I was always like, listen, if nowhere else in the world do you have to understand influence, it's here in the US, because people are used to making choices to their own benefit every day, right? So that influence process then has to be, I have my leadership style, but I have to use it in a way that people feel that the goals that I have align to the goals that they have. How do you get to that? That's communication. That's asking really good questions. That's listening to what's really driving them. Each generation that's coming into the workforce, that idea of mission, purpose, values is just getting turned up, amplified. I love it. And I'm a Gen Xer. No one ever listened to us, right? We were literally forgotten as an entire generation. But I look at millennials really opening that up. to saying, this is what I want out of my work. This is what I want in my career. And now Gen Z, which my 15-year-old daughter is a part of, it is very much purpose driven. It's Simon Sinek's Start With Why. So yes, authentic leadership, but in the understanding that you are there to influence others to help them achieve their goals, and hopefully aligning both organizational and personal goals together.
Mhm. And I think that potentially leans quite nicely into the where mental health comes in to leadership, both understanding, I guess, your own mental health as a leader, but also the people in your team. Can you talk a little bit more to that as to where the two align?
So I spent 20 years in essentially corporate HR, two big global manufacturers. I'm a kid from, the Midwest. And to have the career I did for those 20 years is absolutely amazing to me. I got to travel, I lived in Australia, I lived in China. I burned through 3 passports in 10 years. It was an amazing experience, and I completely value that. But as I progressed up the org chart and then eventually became a VP of HR, I got burned out. I joke I was burned out before it was cool to be. This was now 12 years ago, 13 years ago. It's that 24/7, 365, and no amount of money fixes it. And I also wanted, back to purpose, I wanted to have a greater impact on life. So I decided, and there's a video out. The Greater Green Bay Chamber has a TED Talk like thing, and they asked me to talk about my career pivot, and it's called Pivot Points. And I spent about 10 minutes talking about the fateful trip to Italy that made me decide I couldn't do corporate work anymore. And so the opportunity to buy a business really appealed to me. And the one I ended up buying was a mental health company. Now, I tell people, I am the last guy you want to talk to about your mental health. I am not a counselor. It is interesting because I worked in manufacturing, but I can't weld. I can't, I can't run a CNC machine. I can't do that work. And now I'm in mental health and I can't do the work. I run a business and that's my part of it, but I have to hire people and I have to put trust in them that they're doing the right thing. So my job a lot of times is to be the translator between the two because it's a mental health benefit company. So we contract with employers to offer their employees mental health benefits. And so part of that mental health and that crossroads of leadership, starting with a leader, because I experienced it firsthand and I see it in my coaching clients, executives at high levels, that their mental health is, well, I'll try to get a good night's sleep. I'm going to take a couple of days vacation. I'm going to, but yet they're
I'll
still
be
trying.
outside for 20 minutes a
Yeah,
day or something.
exactly.
Mhm.
Like, 20 minutes of vitamin D is going to fix everything for it. And then they wonder why they're feeling the way they are. So starting with leadership, I'm a firm believer that mental health has to encompass 4 important things for a leader. The first one is physical. Right? This is one operating system. What happens above the eyebrow impacts below and vice versa. So if you are not investing in your diet, your exercise, your sleep, you're never going to be at peak mental health capacity. It's just impossible. The second thing then is what I call mental, the mental aspect of being a leadership, not mental health, but the mental being, what is your value add to it? What is your prioritization model, your processes, how do you get done? Like your tips to do deep work, and have the time to do that. There's then the emotional component, which most of us jump to. It's not real difficult to find the best things for your emotional health. Relationships. Harvard research has shown the longest research study ever done on happiness was done by Harvard. And over 87 years, the same answer comes out: relationships. Right? If we have broad, healthy, deep relationships, you tend to be happier. Less anxiety, less stress. You have greater purpose. You have a sense of belonging. The mental health aspect of relationships is, you can't measure it. Your own tools that you have for self care. My brother in law and I we're taking a couple days to go out to Colorado and we're going to watch a band at the Red Rocks. So in the Red Rock, out in the mountains, and we're going to watch a band. My brother-in-law loves hiking. I joke I like looking at nature. I don't need to be in nature, right? So I understand that piece of it. That's not where I'm going to draw energy from. But what I do love is I used to flip homes. I used to do carpentry. That's my energy source. My brother-in-law, he wants to go do a hike in the woods. Me, give me a project that I complete in a weekend that uses my brain and my hands. That's self-care. And then the third part is understanding the importance of quiet, meditation, mindfulness, whatever it is. That's the emotional aspect. And then the fourth and final then is spirit or spiritual. Why are you here? What's the reason? What's your purpose? What's your driver for it? So those four aspects of physical, mental, emotional, and then spirit is what I feel every leader. You're not going to hit all of them, 100% every day, but have a plan. Know what those are to you. Prioritize those. That can help with the mental health aspect.
I wonder, I'd love to hear the Italy story as to what made you decide you didn't want to be in corporate. But before we get there, to further dig on the mental health side and burnout, and actually maybe the Italy story comes in. There seems to be an increase in burnout now. And I wonder if that part of that is the way we live our lives, the constant stimulus all the time, the fact that we are less likely to be part of religious communities, or we work from home, we live alone, we're much less likely to have relationships, and that's contributing to burnout? Or do you think it is a workplace problem? So I'd like to understand that. And then also if you could expand on what happened in Italy that changed your life.
Well, to answer your questions, is it work? Is it life? Yes. Stress and burnout's the number one reason for poor mental health today. I say that as owning two mental health companies. I see it all the time. The problem is when it comes to mental health, we're not good at articulating. So for a lot of people, they don't understand that. I again, being the translator, not a counselor, but being the translator, I equate our mental health, to when your phone used to ask you if you wanted to go into low power mode, and then they quit asking us because we were all kind of dumb and we'd say no, and then we'd get upset our phone would die. So they're like, we're not even going to ask you that question. But your phone, when it got to 20% battery, would say, would you like us to go into low power mode? So you'd say, yeah, that probably sounds like a good thing to do. So what did it do? Well, it stopped refreshing the apps that were running in the background. It would dim the screen, right? It would lower the sound. It would direct the energy to what was core for the phone to operate. That's us in burnout. It is our body dimming us, trying to quiet us, and conserve the energy to just keep us upright and moving forward. Okay, so when my phone went in low power mode, if I just set it off to the side for 30 minutes and picked it up, is it all better? No, right? It has to be charged. It has to be plugged into something. That's the same with us. A good night's sleep doesn't fix burnout, right? Yeah, it may slow that energy drain, maybe slow it to you're not feeling a drop anymore, but it's not putting anything back in. The only way to reverse is you have to plug into sources that give you energy.
Right. Coming back to those 4 different areas that you can do that from.
It goes back to those four things again, especially when you get into spirit, right? Purpose. What are those things that make you feel good? Now, Harvard, again, research says relationships, but what are those other things to do that? So that took me a long time to learn. I have multiple stories of me, even after leaving corporate because of burnout, still not getting it, not understanding those burnout. So if I could give the world a gift, it would be that understanding of saying, listen, if you could just two things. Number one, don't buy into the hustle culture. Right? Work is not why we're here. Right? Work as we know it only came into being 200 years ago. It's still in the lifetime of human beings on this planet. It is just a small little blip at the end of what we're doing. Before that, I'm not saying they had it great. I don't want to go back 200 years, but they didn't have burnout 200 years ago. I mean, they had a lot of diseases that was knocking people off. But besides that,
I mean, ideally, you have neither, right? You no burnout and no diseases. That would be great.
right, right. So that hustle culture, we need those moments of quiet. We need to be able to just enjoy things. We need to be able to slow the pace down. We don't have to be going. I was at a wonderful breakfast this morning, and you run into people, you network. Hey, how you doing, Brad? Haven't seen you for a while. How are you? Oh, I'm busy. Well, I'm sure you're busy too. And like, it's a badge of honor, and I think it is the antithesis of what we actually need in our lives. So that's the burnout. And again, I will always advocate to having somebody that can help you identify the things that give you energy and to hold you accountable to doing those things. And whether it's a coach or a counselor, a mentor, a friend, a spouse, whatever that is, but someone that can help you see what those things are and hold you accountable. Now, for me, um, the quick version of the Italy story. So I was working for an Italian company. They were the number 2, number 3 shipbuilder in the world. And I was VP of HR over their US operations. And been in there for a year and a half, 2 years after having been 13 years with a different manufacturer before that. And I was not enjoying myself at all. I had left the first one thinking, well, I was just, there was no more mountains for me to climb in this company. I'll go to a different company. And growing up in the 80s, the 70s and the 80s, that was capitalism and Reaganomics and movies like, Wall Street and Secret of My Success, which was your goal was to get to the top of the org chart. I went through high school and college with that's get into a company, work your tail off, get to the top. I did it. I as far as I could go into that. And I got up there and I looked around and I said, is this it? Like, where's the zen? Where's the happiness? Where's the fulfillment? And so when it didn't come, I'm like, well, I must be at the wrong company. I'll go do it again at a different company. And I found myself now, instead of taking 13 years to get there, I was there within a year and a half of the second one. And where it came to the head was I was going to Italy. I was going to be there almost 2 weeks. I was going to be wined and dined, right? They wanted me to present my ideas. They wanted to get input. They wanted strategies. They were going to take me out. I was going to stay in the heart of Venice.
Sounds great so far.
Right? And I was miserable. I didn't want to go. I was like a 5-year-old dragging his feet and like trying to come up with an excuse. And so when I get to the airport, my wife drops me off and I realized I forgot my books. I'm a big reader. And so I didn't have any books for the plane ride or the downtime. And so I picked up this book called The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. And so we get up to cruising altitude. I'm in first class, right? There's wine and food. People are like having this great old time. And I'm the dark cloud sitting, in 4C, bringing everybody down, And I'm reading this book, and I don't know if it was the altitude and the pure oxygen that they pump into the into the cabin, but I think it was a lot of it, the right message at the right time. Where this Gretchen Rubin, in her law, she was a lawyer, came to this point where she looked at herself in a reflection of a rain-soaked window one day and said, "What do you want out of life?" And her answer was happiness. And so I turned to the airplane window and I could see my reflection and I'm like, I'm going to do this. I said, "What do you want out of life?" And the answer was meaning. And up until that point, I would have told you it was success. I had run my whole career on the idea of being successful. But in that moment of weakness and clarity, I said meaning, and quickly realized I had none of that in what I was doing. And I started crying. And nothing freaks a flight attendant out more
Yeah.
than an executive in first class all of us start crying. But that trip was really 2 weeks of me being a corporate executive. And then in the back of my head, what am I going to do with this?
Mhm.
And by the time I came back home, I knew the answer was I couldn't be in corporate anymore. I had to
Mhm.
make a change. And so that was a hell of a conversation to have with my wife,
Mhm.
because I joke, she kissed a very successful executive goodbye and she picked up this guy who was having a midlife crisis.
Mm.
And so eventually, long story short, that led me to buying a mental health company.
Mhm.
And I'm now almost 11 years in to that. And I've started a second mental health company. And then I started three more companies after that as well, each one with a specific purpose. Um, each one also represents a passion
Mhm.
of mine. And I say it on my LinkedIn profile. I'm lucky. I get to, every day, I get to play in 5 different sandboxes. And they are all united with our shared purpose statement is we care, we help. And so I can have a horrible day, but still go to bed at night knowing we've helped people. So is that the answer to burnout? No, but I'm telling you, I was neglecting the spirit piece utterly and completely. And now I'm like, oh, I got that bucket pretty full, right? As long as I remember to stop and enjoy that. But that's a relatively shorter version of the Italy trip.
Mm. I'm sure there's so many people listening that feel stuck in the rat race in whatever way that means for them. And it's interesting because there was a moment, the crying in 4C, that is the
Can
kind
we
of
please not
epitome.
name the episode that?
The Italy trip. We'll call it the Italy trip. So there's the Italy trip, but
Right.
I'm sure that was from years of a build up
Oh,
that brought you to that
yeah.
point that when, and I love that kind of image of looking at yourself in the mirror or catching yourself in the mirror and saying, what do you want out of
Mhm,
life? My mum's a life coach, which I'm very grateful for.
mhm,
My whole life, she never told me what to do. She
mhm,
asked me questions and
mhm,
helped me figure myself out, which I think is very lucky to have had that. And she shared with me something that it was either one of her clients or one of her colleagues shared with her once, which was, what do you want out of life? And they
mhm,
said, I want my life's purpose to be to make good memories
mhm,
or make happy memories,
mhm,
which is something that I think is actually quite profound because it's not
mhm,
about to be happy,
mhm.
because in the moment you might chase happiness, but that's not good for your long term.
Right.
But to create happy memories is something that is a lasting happiness, something that you feel good in the moment and that you can look back on and feel happy again from that. And I think if that were to drive our life, or meaning were to drive our life's decisions more so than money or success, whatever that looks like, we'd probably have a happier, healthier population.
I say this sometimes. Work is weird. Like if you started with a blank piece of paper and said we are going to make a ecosystem of these free-willed creatures that have all of the skills and gifts and abilities to survive. What should we have them do? And the idea of work is just weird, right? The exchange of goods and services grew into this. Now we spend more time with coworkers in the work environment than we do anything else in life. Nothing comes close to it in our lifetime. And then we get pigeonholed and we find these safe paths and we get comfortable and we don't push on them at all. And then you have the moments like I have where it's really my soul crying out. This is not, in the video, I talk about the plan I worked was given to me by some really good people, my parents, teachers, the whole society at the time. Like, this is a good thing. And I bought into it. I was my decision. But to get to 40 and realize that wasn't mine, that wasn't where purpose and meaning was going to come from. That was a lot of reckoning. And there's still like days where I miss the paycheck. I miss the perks. I miss at times because I work in a small company. I miss an international team of really smart people. And I know there's other ways for me to get to that, but it's not like I regret. but it took me a long time to figure out what was meaning for me.
Mm-hmm. David, my co-host, always talks about a trade-off with everything, that it's unlikely that you'd go out of the corporate world into something completely different, keep all of the perks from there, take it with you, right? There was a trade-off, but the trade-off for you was finding more meaning, which is probably worth the loss of some of those other things.
So here's the weird thing that happened. So on September 12th of 2014, my wife and I signed our life away to buy ERC, the Employee Resource Center, the first company. So that was a Friday. We took every dollar we ever made, everything we had worked for, we put it at risk. We took out 6 figures worth of debt to buy a company that A, I have never run anything on my own before, and B, I'm not a counselor. That Wednesday, I woke up and I'm getting ready and I look in the mirror and my left side love handle, the little inner tube I carry sometimes, was bigger on the left than it was the right. And so I called my wife and I'm like, do I look lopsided to you? And she's like, oh God, yes. Like, you need to call your doctor. So I'd been having some health issues all through that summer, but I had chalked it up to the fact that I was leaving corporate, buying a company, trying to find the right one, NDAs, all that stuff. So me being a male, I don't call my doctor. I get to the end, I'm like, oh, Allison's going to yell at me if I don't. So I sent him an email and I listed out everything that was wrong. The next day I get a call from his office. It's his nurse saying, you have to go to the emergency room. And I'm like, why? Like, your doctor wants you to go to the emergency right now. You need to have blood work done. So I went begrudgingly. I spent 3 hours in the ER. They did 3 rounds of tests, and each one was more invasive and much more specific. And at the end of it, the nurse who I'd been joking around with and having just a lovely time for 3 hours came in white as a ghost. And she said, you have a mass, and it's the size of 3 stacked dinner plates in your abdomen. And I'm like, where? And she said, it's everywhere. It's what's pushing out on the side. Your back pain is because it's strangling your kidney. You have an appointment with an oncologist the next morning. And I'm like, is this cancer? And she goes, we don't know. So this was September 18th, 2014. The Thursday after putting everything at risk, I was being told, you have a mass and you have to meet with an oncologist. And what it led to was it was cancer. And so my first 9 months of living the dream
Yeah.
went through 12 rounds of chemo. Now I'm good. I'm fine. That was, we're coming up on, 10 years ago, the anniversary of that. But here's why I tell that story. Number one is following your dream does not mean bad things aren't going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. It's not an insurance policy. It's not Teflon I think that's one of the sickest, funniest jokes, of buy a business and then less than a week later. Mm-hmm. But the second piece was, and I believe this 100%, that I would not be here today if I had not made that move. Mm-hmm. Because, listen, I have my wife and my daughter, and I love them. But this company was my purpose. Mm-hmm. I was doing what I wanted to do. And I'm like, I am not leaving this. I am not, this is not how I'm going out. Mm-hmm. Now, as much as I had power over what was eventually going to happen, I had great doctors and advancements in medicine and research, is why I'm here today. But in terms of spirit, I firmly believe if I had still been in that corporate job, that the outcome could have been very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the power of our mindset, the power of our motivation. It's so incredible how much it can affect our physical world. Right. It's one of those things when you were sharing that story, that it was 6 days after you'd made this huge decision, made me think of the saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Oh. Which it's almost right. That, isn't it? Like, oh, you wait, Steve, this is going to be fun.
Oh, I vacillate between that quote and Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm obviously very glad that you came out the other side of both of those things.
Right. So, but there is, if there is a cosmic plan to things, mm-hmm. Mine worked out pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a whole stew of ingredients in that
Mm-hmm.
through that piece. But ultimately, going back to that idea of stress and burnout and purpose and so forth, I think for any leader to invest time to figuring out what is their meaning, what is their things that get them excited, that gives them energy, and to invest more. We
Mm-hmm.
listen. I get we need paychecks and we need to pay for things. I understand that. I joke there's a big difference between sometimes having a job and
Mm-hmm.
having a job, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we have to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
But any time invested in figuring out your secret sauce is time well spent.
Mm-hmm. So that leads me to potentially wrap up with just lightly touching on coaching, because that's a place where you and I overlap in the coaching world. A couple of things actually to pull out, because you referenced that you own a mental health company, but you're not a counsellor. There can sometimes be a misunderstanding as to what a coach really is versus what a counsellor is, probably especially considering your companies. So, how do you draw the line, and how would you advise other coaches that might feel themselves slipping into a different role as to where they provide the best value as a coach?
I really appreciate you asking that question because it's a tricky slope there. Let's start with how did I get into coaching? So in my corporate career, I was a VP of HR, but I was really an organizational development guy, and we used a model we called it the triad of coaching. And so high potential, succession plan, senior leaders, you would have an external coach that was wonderful because I got to work with industrial psychologists and traveled with them and got to pick their brains. I was the internal coach because I knew the board game that we were in. I knew the pieces, I knew the rules, and then there was the performance leader. And so they would have this triad of coaching, external coach, internal coach. When I left and bought the mental health company, I started getting calls from leaders that I'd worked with saying, "Hey, can you now be my external coach?" And I'm like, that can be my thing. I'm not a counselor, but I miss that. And so I started working with leaders. And what happened was exactly what you described. Because I owned a mental health company and a coach, people couldn't always tell between the difference. So the first thing I did is I spun it off into its own company. And it is mine. It's named after me because I don't want anyone else in it. It's just my thing. The second thing was I needed to have a really good definition. And and there's variations of this, but I am a firm believer that coaching is a go forward process and counseling tends to be a look back. And so in coaching, sometimes I will have a client that I realize something in their past is a barrier or it's holding them back. Now, the beauty is I can point them to the other company and say, listen, I got a deal for you. It's included in the package, but we have a brick wall between them. I don't know what you talk to the counselor with. I don't talk to the counselor about it. They won't talk to me. The only person that connects us is you. So you decide. Now, I strongly advocate you tell them that you're working with a coach, but that doesn't mean you have to tell me what you're working on. But in terms of looking forward to what you want, and that's why I'm very specific in my coaching. I work in leadership, right? I like working executive level. I've niched into the wealth management space. But first meeting, I talk about here's what we're going to focus on, here's what we're going to do. If there is other stuff in there, I can help you find the resource. But you're absolutely right. You get into coaching and sometimes you hit that little speed bump. And that's where I think as a coach, it's your obligation to point that out. But also your obligation though to say that's not in our zone of what we can work on, but here's resources that I think could be helpful to you. It sounds pretty on paper. It's harder to execute.
Yeah, yeah. But I like that distinction between looking forward versus looking backwards, and that of course there will be crossover a little bit in either of those domains. But I like that as a kind of clearer cut there.
And I am very much an advocate to coaches. As soon as you're starting to feel it, you got to call it, because it's very difficult for people to share that piece with somebody. And my fear is they share it with me and I go, yeah, that I can't, sorry. So to be quick on that, realizing what it is and have that discussion.
Mm. But you're also in a unique position, like you said, to be able to refer them the other side anyway, which is probably, I'm sure, useful to cover both sides. So I want to wrap up with a couple of quick fire rapid round. So best leadership book.
I mentioned I love Start With Why. We talk about the future of leadership and where is it going. Um, People want meaning, they want purpose, they want alignment in their life. They want to know that there is an impact that they're going to have. And so to be able to connect someone's task, responsibilities, their job to something bigger, I think has to be a key attribute of any leadership to do. So I love Start With Why. For a leader personally, Atomic Habits. My coaching, I have a coaching program. It's a 6 to 9 month program. It has a beginning, middle, and end. I joke that Atomic Habits stole a lot of my process, but it is how do you commit and have accountability to it. And I think if you couple those two things together, um, there's a lot of benefits to be had.
So next one, this is probably really hard to answer, but a mental health hack.
It's a hack, but it's not. So one of the things I did, because again, the stress and the burnout, and now I have, as I mentioned, I have 5 companies. Each one's passion project. I went to a meditation retreat. Went to a mountaintop in North Carolina, and it was a 5 day retreat. 2.5 days was basic yoga. I say basic because I was the only one that didn't know how to do yoga, so they gave me the modifications. And then we did 2 sessions in the morning, 2 sessions in the afternoon, 1 session in the evening of meditation and breathing techniques. And then the last 2.5 days was in silence. So the instructor spoke, but no talking, no writing, no music, no TV, no reading. There was no TV or radio in our rooms. It was absolute silence. If I went in on that day one and the noise in my head was 100%, if that was the measurement, when I left, it was less than 20. I have a meditation practice. I do it every morning. It is the number one thing that has helped me. They call it, if you notice, there's a lion behind me. It's kind of in a Buddha pose, a meditation pose. They call it Zen. That's Zen Steve. So my folks gave me that because they saw the difference in me when I came back and how I manage things. And again, it's putting that quiet back into my life. So I advocate any type of quiet inducing process is one of that and relationships.
Mm-hmm. Nice, nice. One thing you wish every CEO did once a week.
Ooh. Well, I just gave you the one I think they should do every day. I so especially this is more bigger organizations. And this in coaching. Coaching is the belief that your client has the answers they need, right? You go into it's not about you, it's about them. But I do joke occasionally. I can describe what a roller coaster is to a leader, or I can ask questions to get a leader to say the word roller coaster. But if they've never seen one, they're not going to be able to articulate it. So sometimes you have to give the client something. Probably the number one thing I give my clients is the idea of step down meetings, which is going and meeting with people at least 2, if not 3 levels down in the organization, buy them pizza, get 4 or 5 in a room, kick HR out, kick anybody else out of the room. And the deal is they can ask you any question they want. In return, you get to ask any business question, organization question you want. But it is a tit for tat thing. I have never had a leader not come back and say, wow, did I learn stuff about my organization or the company? To hear that unvarnished from the front line. So that's the one thing I think every leader could do, a 2 or 3 step down meeting once a week, you'd be amazed what they're going to learn about their company.
Nice. I love that. I've never heard that before. It sounds like it's a simple concept, but I'd never sort of thought about it before. And I can see the power in what that would unlock. Well, Steve, is there anything you think we've left on the table that you'd like to
I feel like I
speak
had
to?
a counseling session here today. I feel I've laid a lot of stuff bare for you. I appreciate being able to tell a little more of my story than what I was anticipating with this. But it's also, I go back to again our Venn diagram of both of us being coaches and in the respective spaces. That would be the other thing, for a leader. If you don't have that safe place, that external resource where you can go problem solve without judgment, without, to be completely vulnerable, to get the junk out of your head. That's the one thing I advocate. If you really want to, elevate your leadership, make that impact, have a legacy. Having a coach does not mean you're doing something wrong. Having a coach means that, in my vernacular, you want to be greater in things. So I'll leave you with that.
Yes, thank you. Where can people follow you? Where can they go to keep up with what you're doing?
So the beauty is I am the only Steve Baue in the world. So it's Steve, EVE, Baue, Baue. And so if you Google me, you'll find some leftover stuff from my corporate days out there, but you will find one of my 5 websites. The coaching is stevebaue.com. The rest of it kind of falls under this idea of Baue Management Group. But that is the gift of being the only one in the world.
Nice. Well, thank you, Steve. It's been so insightful to hear your little insights as to what you've learned from coaching, what you've learned in leadership, the crossover of different things. It's been fascinating talking to you. I'm sure we could have a part 2 at some point and dig into it more.
I appreciate your time and your care today.